The 2024 summer transfer window has been very boring. Look, someone had to say it. In actual fact, quite a lot of people are saying it. Don't believe me? What has been the highlight of this window? Kylian Mbappe to Real Madrid, a transfer that we have all known about for the last 3 years, had a blow-by-blow account of every time that Florentino Perez has so much as thought about the Frenchman, meaning that, when it was actually confirmed, there was more of a sense of relief among most football fans that we wouldn't have to keep on hearing about it anymore, rather than any genuine sense of excitement. Savinho to Manchester City, a man who was signed by City Football Group owned Troyes in 2022, never played a single minute of football for them, spent last season on loan at City Football Group owned Girona, and has now signed for City Football Group owned Manchester City, as is the inevitable fate for anyone who performs well enough within the Emirati-owned City Football Group empire. Alright, what about Amadou Onana to Aston Villa? The fourth most expensive transfer in world football this summer. We didn't know about Onana's move months or years in advance, and Everton and Aston Villa aren't owned by the same state-owned multi-club ownership group. Hey, it's a start. But let's be honest, Onana is hardly a player who is going to get anyone on the edge of their seats. His post-match press conferences are more entertaining than most of his performances.
L'efficacité. Merci beaucoup. Il a manqué aujourd'hui. Je vous écoute. Andre is not even my name, mate. Do you know what I mean? Go on.
Without looking it up, could you name the 3 biggest transfers in world football this summer, ahead of Onana, in terms of the highest transfer fees? I'll give you a second to think. You can even pause the video if you like. Alright, I'll put you out of your misery. They are João Neves, who just joined PSG from Benfica, Moussa Diaby, who joined Al Ittihad from Aston Villa, and Lenny Yoro, who joined Manchester United from Lille. It's hardly blockbuster stuff, is it? Last summer's 4 biggest signings by comparison were Declan Rice, Jude Bellingham, Moises Caicedo, and Harry Kane. I rest my case. But why has the 2024 summer transfer window been quite so underwhelming? Well, that's what today's video is all about. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey inside the boardrooms of Premier League, La Liga and Bundesliga clubs as we attempt to figure out why this summer's transfer window has been about as interesting as falling asleep to a podcast of Michael Owen reading out his shopping list. Cheese, crackers, water, crackers, cheese, scratch card, bread. Crikey, I'm not sure if I've fallen asleep or just slipped into a coma. There are lots of technical reasons why I think this transfer window has been especially and unusually tedious, which we will obviously come on to, but I want to start with an often overlooked macro reason as to why I think people find transfer windows, and transfers in general, to be less exciting now than in the past. When most people think of the excitement of a new signing, they think of that player pulling on the shirt for the first time, watching them take to the pitch in your club's colours, and ultimately, seeing what kind of impact they can make. When we think of the most exciting signings, we probably tend to think of flair players who like to take players on, beat them and get the crowd off their feet, or goal scorers who are going to come in and fire a team up the division with their sharp eye for goal. The reality, however, is that these types of players are becoming vanishingly rare. Flair players in particular, as I covered in an entire video, are a dying breed. The elite clubs and elite coaches, by and large, don't want the risk-taking of instinctive, inventive, and off-the-cuff mavericks. They want players who provide an important function within a team, work hard, and will follow their increasingly restrictive and specific instructions. That is an oversimplification. Not all modern footballers have been reduced to being mere robots, but nor is it a total distortion. This isn't just a function of first-team football either, where the stakes are so high and the financial incentives so great. It happens in the youth team game now, from a very early age, which is why we rarely see raw and explosive players even when they make their debuts, And when we do, invariably, that is because they entered a formal academy setting late or have come from countries which still encourage more freedom and expression. Speaking as a Hull City fan, when I think of our most exciting signings, I think of players like JJ Okocha, Giovanni, and most recently, Jadon Philogene. It's not just that they are or were exceptional players, although they were all that, it's that there was a genuine air of excitement when their arrivals were announced to see them in a Hull City shirt, precisely because of the excitement that would accompany them on the pitch. Not only are there fewer of those types of players, think Chelsea signing Hazard in 2012, Ozil's move to Arsenal in 2013, or when Ronaldinho joined Barcelona in 2003, if my Hull City examples were too obscure for you, meaning that there is less excitement about the profile of player that clubs are signing. That sense of excitement surrounding the impact that they can make that I talked about, even if they aren't inherently exciting or entertaining flair players, has been greatly reduced for almost the exact same reason. It's no secret that one of the biggest shifts in football in recent years, somewhat ironically with the exception of the most successful team in the world during that time, Real Madrid, has been towards systems rather than personnel. If players function more like cogs in a machine than as individuals, so it follows that replacing one cog with another is less exciting than replacing one individual with a different individual. I'll try to give an example, in case I've lost any of you. Claude Makelele and Rodri are two of the Premier League's all-time great holding midfielders, vital to Chelsea and Manchester City respectively, and for what it's worth, which is very little, I actually think Rodri is a better player than Makelele was. But whereas Makelele's impact at Chelsea was absolutely transformative, as was his departure from Real Madrid in fact, albeit in a negative sense, with Makelele allowing Chelsea, particularly following Mourinho's arrival, to play a midfield three with him at the base of it, something not only they but very few Premier League teams had done before, playing a pivotal role in Chelsea, having the best defensive record of the Premier League era, and allowing Frank Lampard to really flourish, becoming the prolific midfield goalscorer we now all remember him being. Rodri, by contrast, brilliant as he is, didn't substantively or radically, certainly not initially at least, alter the way in which Manchester City played. Rodri joined a Man City team that had just won the quadruple for a start, so radical change wasn't really required, and he was signed as a long-term replacement for Fernandinho. In the season-opening Community Shield, Rodri played at the base of a three-man midfield, with David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne either side of him, just as Fernandinho had throughout the previous season. Later on in the season, we saw Rodri in more of a double pivot alongside Ilkay Gundogan, a slight variation on the role Fernandinho typically performed, but nothing like the Makelele revolution at Chelsea, which led to the English press naming that midfield anchor role after him. Likewise, when we think of Declan Rice joining Chelsea for over £100 million, I think that actually was a fairly exciting signing for Arsenal fans due to Rice's talents, but he was effectively a more athletic and consistent upgrade on Granit Xhaka. When the Gunners signed Patrick Vieira, by contrast, or Dennis Bergkamp, if you want to compare him to the arrival of Gabriel Jesus or Kai Havertz, both Vieira and Bergkamp radically altered the complexion of the team and the way in which they played. I spoke about goal scorers, like flair players, albeit to a slightly lesser extent being a dying breed, but even if you take probably the best goal scorer in the world right now, and certainly in the Premier League, Erling Haaland, who was obviously an exciting signing for Manchester City, probably their most exciting in a good few years, and did actually lead to a rare system and tactical adaptation on Pep Guardiola's part to accommodate the talents and strengths of an individual, I would still compare and contrast Haaland's arrival in 2022 with Sergio Aguero's arrival 11 years earlier in 2011. Some of you, disgracefully, may be too young to remember that, which is enough to make me feel physically sick, but when Aguero arrived, 1, he was less known among casual football fans than Haaland was in 2022. Everyone knew his name and his reputation, but normies weren't exactly watching Atletico Madrid games or highlights every week, like how we had seen a million Haaland montages by the time that he arrived at the Etihad, and thus, there is an element of excitement in the unknown that has been been eroded by the internet and other advances in media and technology that have made the world a much smaller place. I mean, just think of Middlesbrough signing Juninho from Sao Paulo in 1995, when their fans wouldn't have had any idea what to expect, only for him to be their greatest player of the modern era. That kind of mystery and surprise is vanishingly rare in the modern game. 2, he massively improved a Manchester City team that had finished third the previous season. And 3, he changed the entire spectacle of watching Manchester City play. Haaland's debut, you may recall, was the Community Shield against Liverpool, where he blanked over 90 minutes and actually missed a big chance. But even if you take his league debut, where he scored both goals in a 2-0 win against West Ham, there was excitement in witnessing this goal-scoring machine and seeing him link up with Kevin De Bruyne, but it was nothing like Sergio Aguero's debut for Manchester City against Swansea City in 2011, where he came off the bench and turned the game on its head, scoring 2 and assisting another in a 4-0 win, which made everyone sit up and say, wow, this lad is a game changer. Frankly, there just aren't as many truly game-changing signings anymore, at least not in a way that is immediately obvious, striking, and entertaining to the average fan. It may well be the case that Riccardo Calafiori is the final piece in the jigsaw that carries Arsenal to the title, but I would wager, were I a betting man, that his role in a hypothetical Arsenal title-winning debut campaign won't quite be the same as Sergio Aguero's at Man City, in which he scored 31 goals, including that 94th minute winner in the final game of the season against Queen's Park Rangers, that won Man City the league. Hey, who knows, but I would be fairly surprised. That's not to say that utterly transformative transfers don't still happen. Virgil van Dijk and Alisson to Liverpool would be one or two clear and obvious examples. From only 6 or 7 years ago, they are just a lot less common. Interestingly, and this holds true for a lot of factors in why I think the 2024 summer transfer window has felt quite underwhelming on a macro level, this is a problem that is much more pronounced at the elite level and among the elite clubs. Whilst it is difficult this summer especially, for reasons we are about to come to, for the likes of Arsenal, Man City and Liverpool to make transformative signings, it is much easier for, e.g., championship clubs like my club Hull City. I mean, it is especially easy for us because we don't currently have any players, so just signing any senior professional players would be transformative. But if you look at Jack Clarke at Sunderland, Morgan Whittaker at Plymouth, or the example I gave before of Jadon Philogene at Hull, there is still a much greater propensity of game-changing, season-defining, and, therefore, inherently more exciting signings for fans the further down the pyramid you go, where there is more precarity, less settled squads and established tactics and systems, and more leeway for the most talented players to express themselves. Inevitably, though, outside of the specific club or league you follow, if indeed you don't support a super club regardless, it is the business that happens at the top end, among the biggest clubs, that tends to determine the mood of the window and of the transfer market. Birmingham City signing Mark Leonard from Brighton following 2 excellent seasons on loan at Northampton Town is very exciting for Birmingham City fans and may well have a transformative impact upon their team, but it doesn't really move the needle for anyone else. That is an overarching, gradual trend within the world of football though, particularly at the elite level, but it doesn't explain why this summer transfer window in particular, far more than 2023 or 2022 for example, has felt so underwhelming. It's not as though the shift in terms of player profiles, tactics and systems has rapidly accelerated within the space of 12 months. Maybe the biggest stumbling block, in terms of exciting deals being done, has been clubs' precarious financial situations, whether that be a lack of funds in absolute terms, or difficulties relating to FFP, PSR, and other regulatory issues, or indeed, a combination of the two. In the more than 30-year history of the Premier League, 60% of the league's point deductions came last season alone. Everton were deducted 10 points, later reduced to 6, followed by an additional 2-point deduction, resulting in them being docked 8 points overall. Meanwhile, Nottingham Forest were deducted 4 points themselves. All 3 deductions were a result of breaches to the league's profit and sustainability rules. It was a good season, in some ways, to receive those deductions, since the miserable efforts of the three promoted clubs meant both Everton and Forest still survived. But whilst those two were the sharp edge of the sword, several other clubs flew dangerously close to the sun. Chelsea, Newcastle United and Aston Villa are all reportedly at risk of imminent breaches if they don't take radical action. Meanwhile, on the continent, Juventus were up 10 points the season before last, Inter Milan were almost hit with UEFA FFP sanctions in 2023, La Liga clubs have far less revenue and much stricter spending regulations than Premier League clubs, Barcelona's financial and regulatory problems have been very well documented, every club in Ligue 1, other than PSG, is practically skint, and even PSG, following successive Champions League round of 16 exits, following immense spending sprees, having failed to get their hands on the biggest trophy in European football since the Qatari state bought the club, appear to have had a rethink. PSG have only signed 2 players this summer, João Neves from Benfica and Matvei Safarov from Krasnodar, for a combined total of less than 80 million euros. It is nothing like the 350 million euros they splurged out last summer, nor 2 summers before that, when they jointly unveiled Achraf Hakimi, Jorginho Wijnaldum, Sergio Ramos, Gianluigi Donnarumma, and Lionel Messi. The spending over the last few seasons in general has been absolutely astronomical. Between 2020 and 2023, Premier League clubs spent a total of more than 6 billion euros in transfer fees, which is more than they spent throughout the entire 2000s, from 2000 through to 2009. Last season, despite the idea of a COVID correction kicking in, the market reached yet new heights. For the first time ever, worldwide spending on transfer fees eclipsed 10 billion euros in a single season. The Premier League alone spent almost 3 billion euros. What that means is that, firstly, clubs have burnt through a lot of cash recently, meaning that they aren't sitting on massive reserves or aren't able to invest heavily again for regulatory reasons. Secondly, because of that spending, many of, particularly the biggest clubs, are happy with their squads, having snapped up their primary targets in previous windows. And thirdly, a lot of the top players, who would naturally be the most exciting signings, are pretty settled in, having joined elite clubs that they are in no rush to leave in recent windows. I am thinking of the likes of Jude Bellingham, Harry Kane and Erling Haaland, all of whom joined super clubs within the last couple of summers. Even those clubs who do have cash and some regulatory wriggle room, I am thinking of maybe Tottenham Hotspur or AC Milan, are finding it hard to get deals done because of the wrinkles in the market elsewhere. The transfer market isn't static. In some ways, it is like a living organism or a big machine with lots of complex interconnected parts. Clubs like Barcelona and Newcastle's caution, or even further down the food chain with an Everton or Sevilla, removes an element of lubricant that is required for the whole machine to work. Clubs don't want to sell players until they've got a replacement lined up, but if the club that they were targeting their replacement from takes the same approach, it is hard to get the wheels rolling and for the market to swing into action as a whole. And these troubled clubs are causing backlogs which filter all the way down to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th divisions. It is much like the economy. When faith in the system as a whole is undermined and people feel pessimistic, they spend less, further undermining the system, creating more pessimism, and so the vicious cycle continues. Look, what I'm saying is that we need to lube up the market and have some faith, alright? In previous summer windows, when there has been an expected slowdown in the market like we've seen this summer, there has often been someone to juice up the market and keep everything well lubed. Alright, I promise I'll stop that analogy soon. Post-COVID, for example, when the hole in clubs' finances was thought likely to see a correction that never happened, Todd Bowley and Blueco took over at Chelsea, spending such crazy amounts of money that they played a pivotal role in keeping valuations high, forcing other clubs to dip into the market, and keeping the wheels rolling. And last summer, you had the even greater economic stimulus of Saudi Arabia, an entirely new market for clubs to offload their often unwanted and aging players for enormous fees, relieving them of a substantial section of their wage bill in the process. To continue the analogy that I promised I would stop doing, if the whole transfer market was the economy as a whole, Chelsea, Saudi Arabia, and other forms of stimulus have been football's quantitative easing. The Saudi market, in its newness, along with Chelsea's spending to a much lesser extent, was also innately shocking and exciting in its novelty and newness, adding to the entertainment value of last summer's window as a whole. Neymar, Benzema and Ruben Neves joining Saudi Pro League clubs were all wow moments for a lot of people, as was both Caicedo and Lavia, along with the sheer volume of Nkunku, Palmer, Dizazi, Jackson, etc. all joining Chelsea, in a way that this summer's biggest Saudi imports like Moussa Diaby, Houssam Aouar and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, and Chelsea's latest arrivals like Kiernan Dewsbury Hall and Philip Jorgensen just aren't. We know that Saudi clubs are a factor, albeit it already seems a greatly reduced one now, and we all know that Chelsea are absolutely mental and will sign anyone under the age of 26. That's old news. What can 2024 offer us? Predictions of a bubble then, or of a market correction, may have been premature due to unforeseen circumstances, but they weren't necessarily baseless. It definitely feels as though clubs are much less sure of what true value is for their players and their targets at other clubs this summer. I was bitterly disappointed, and indeed I still am, at the £15 million that Hull City received for Jacob Greaves and the £18 million for Jadon Philogene. I think, particularly Philogene, was worth considerably more than that. When you look at the valuations of remotely comparable players in the past, but then Leeds United didn't fare that much better with Crescencio Somerville receiving £25 million from West Ham, meanwhile Leeds themselves just bid £7 million for Norwich's Jonathan Rowe. I would be absolutely stunned if that bid, or anything like it, were to be accepted, but it shows some of the friction in the market that clubs feel it isn't worth holding out for bigger fees, presumably in the fear that they might never get them. I appreciate, by the way, that if you don't really follow the Championship, all of those references may have gone straight over your head, but compared to the £30 million Watford got for João Pedro 12 months ago, the £25 million that Bournemouth paid Bristol City for Alex Scott, and the potential £33 million that Brentford received for Ollie Watkins in 2020, all Championship clubs at the time, it suggests that there has at least been a minor correction. A lot of football clubs and chief executives simultaneously suspect that the market may have run too hot and needs to come down a bit, making them less willing to pay insane prices, while still refusing to sell their own players for below what has been established as fair value over the last few seasons. The end result, naturally, is that a lot of deals just don't get done. There is another contributing factor to all of this, in terms of both the market correction and less excitement in the transfer market, and that is the increased number of players running their contracts down. I made a whole video about this and the reasons behind it 2 years ago, which is still just as, if not even more relevant now, but more and more players, especially the best and most desirable players, aware of their own negotiating powers, are deliberately choosing to run down their contracts. Of course, the closer a player gets to their current contract expiring, the less their current club tends to be able to command for them, right up to when their contract actually expires and they become free to leave, as has become more and more common. What also tends to happen with soon-to-be out-of-contract players, again, especially the best ones, is that their likely next destination is revealed long before the start of the transfer window. In England, for example, players are allowed to hold official talks with domestic clubs up to a month before their contract actually expires, and up to 6 months in the case of foreign clubs. Note the word official talks there too. The biggest transfer of the summer, of course, was Kylian Mbappe to Real Madrid. But as alluded to in the introduction, the fact that this was the end of about a 3 or 4 year transfer saga made the ultimate announcement feel less like some incredible revelation and more like a racehorse that gets taken out the back of the stables following an injury and put out of its misery with a bullet between the eyes. Alright, that might be a slight exaggeration, but you know what I mean. If Mbappe's next club had been a total mystery until the moment that he was pictured in their shirt, or if he had U-turned on his Real Madrid move at the last second and joined, say, Bayern Munich or Liverpool, that would have been very exciting. Mbappe is perhaps the most high-profile example, but his move to Real Madrid speaks to two broader trends that have bred further boredom within the transfer market. One is the propensity of the elite clubs, who have never been so sophisticated in their scouting and recruitment before, to identify their first, second, third, fourth and fifth targets in every position well in advance and get their business done as early as possible, preferably before the window has even opened. And the second is the 24-hour news cycle and journalists who seem to be dedicated solely to covering transfers, keeping us updated around the clock on every player's movements during and outside of the transfer window, even if they've just got an Uber to Nando's. On the first, Real Madrid's other summer signing Endrick, who, in previous generations, as one of the most highly rated teenagers on the planet, arriving in Europe from South America, would have been a very exciting arrival, is an excellent case in point. If Real Madrid had signed Endrick completely out of the blue last week, it would be a window-defining signing that would have sent social media into meltdown, and everyone, given his cross-continent interest, would be talking about it. What actually happened is that Real Madrid agreed a deal to sign Endrick in December 2022, 1 year and 8 months ago. Indeed, since missing out on Neymar to Barcelona, Real Madrid just sign every Brazilian wonder kid as soon as they're out of nappies, and 15 years later, when they turn 18, they actually sign for them. Of course, there is still some excitement and anticipation in actually seeing Endrick in a Real Madrid shirt. I would personally still consider it one of the most exciting arrivals of the window, but in terms of the transfer itself, rather than the player, it was agreed over 4 transfer windows ago. Mbappe and Endrick are, again, the most high-profile examples, but it isn't just them. In Serie A, for example, as has become a very prominent trend in recent years, 3 of the 10 most expensive deals this summer, Davide Fratesi to Inter Milan, Charles de Ketelaere to Atalanta, and Vitinha to Genoa, are just obligations to buy being triggered for players who were already on loan at their new clubs last season. Again, this is another area where lesser clubs, with less resources, further down the footballing food chain, are actually more exciting. Partly because they tend to have less sophisticated senior management and recruitment teams, making them less organised, and partly because of the top-down nature of the transfer market, which leaves, let's say, championship clubs, often doing a lot of their business late on in the window, after particularly the top Premier League clubs have got most of their business done. This window has been particularly harshly impacted by timing in terms of the confluence of the Euros, Copa America and the Olympics, which either made teams act especially early, before those tournaments, or has further delayed movement, until after them, with little of genuine interest happening during the Euros and Copa America. Ordinarily, we would see the market kick back into action once those tournaments came to an end, but the sophistication of clubs' recruitment teams has also halted one of the age-old traditions of the transfer market. I am referring, of course, to the post-tournament signing. I am thinking, for example, of Liverpool signing El Hadji Diouf and Salif Diao, in large part off the back of their performances for Senegal at the 2002 World Cup, Nicolas Otamendi, Alexis Sanchez and Asamoah Gyan all getting moves following the 2010 World Cup, or, more recently, and in the case of the Euros, the likes of Moussa Sissoko, João Mario and Hal Robson-Kanu all enhancing their reputations and making big moves following Euro 2016. Those kinds of post-tournament transfers weren't always the most well-considered or successful, hence why they have largely died out, but they were undoubtedly entertaining. In many cases, it was a little-known player who just played a handful of outstanding games, being great to watch, and all of a sudden, they were rocking up at your club or in your league. It didn't matter that they might turn out like Roque Jr. or Cleberson because, at the time, they felt exciting. In football, as in life, vibes are everything. You can make that a quote if you like. If I ever start selling merch, I'll just stick that on it. That and a t-shirt with, without further ado, and a picture of the great man alongside it. Where was I? Oh yeah, it's not just that transfers are happening earlier and are more well considered, it's also that we find out about them so much sooner, as I mentioned in the case of Mbappe, due to an entire industry emerging around covering transfer news. There is no point in me indirecting this, is there? I might as well just say Fabrizio Romano, although he is far from the only one. We now know when players are first contacted by a club, through an agent, the initial terms being offered, the back and forth negotiations, when a player has bought a flat or a house nearby, whether they are bringing their pets from South America, how many sugars they like in their cup of tea, whether their mum shares memes with some racist undertones on Facebook, what shirt number they want, what shirt number they're actually getting, where they'll park at the training ground, and why it doesn't matter that they have a history of sexual assault allegations behind them. We should all just move on. Days, weeks, and months before the transfers actually happen and are announced, stripping transfers of any and all excitement that they might once have had. By the time that we get confirmation that Dani Olmo is on his way back to Barcelona, or Julian Alvarez has signed for Atletico Madrid, it's about as shocking and as exciting as noticing your neighbours have put their bins out, meaning that it must be bin day again. Came around quick this time, didn't it? I wonder how many bin days I've got left. I don't even blame these journalists, reporters, social media influencers, whatever you want to call them, although I do think Fabrizio Romano is a repugnant and amoral ghoul for other reasons. It is the constant appetite for news, rumours, gossip and updates by supporters that has created these monsters and kept them in business, and even now that many people recognise that it is largely a negative and toxic development for football, their appetite isn't going anywhere, so nor are they. The final point I'll make is that football's various spending and loss regulations haven't just slowed down the market because some teams are either unable or reluctant to do business. It has also incentivised academy investment and youth team development by typically exempting those costs, and many of the elite clubs now have excellent academies. As a result, combined with fewer signings, clubs are promoting from within now more than they were, say, 10 years ago, reverting a trend which few anticipated. Manchester City, for example, for all of their wealth, gave game time to academy graduates like James McAtee, Mohamedou Sissoko, Jacob Wright, and Mika Hamilton last season, as well as more established former academy players like Rico Lewis, Oscar Bob, and Phil Foden. Meanwhile, Liverpool handed minutes to Owen Beck, Lewis Kumas, Mateusz Muszyłowski, Trey Neone, Callum Scanlon, Stefan Bajcetic, Luke Chambers, Jayden Dans, James McConnell, Bobby Clark, Connor Bradley, and their more established academy graduates to boot. This is a trend that is likely to continue, since academy players often tend to be better versed in the systems and tactics that the managers of their clubs want them to play in. They are more malleable, they're less likely to disrupt squad dynamics than a new signing, who might have greater demands in terms of minutes and where they play, and, above all else, it is lucrative for clubs to give academy graduates opportunities, not just because they don't cost them anything, unlike new signings, but also because, if they play, enhance their reputation, and become valuable assets, in the event of a sale, they are recorded as pure profit in FFP and PSR calculations. In other words, you get the financial and regulatory benefit both on the way in and on the way out, and you need only look at Manchester City's sales of Taylor Harwood-Bellis and Liam Delap, Arsenal offloading Emil Smith-Rowe, and Newcastle United sanctioning Elliot Anderson's move to Nottingham Forest this summer, all for very lucrative fees, to see those benefits in action. In some ways, this window shouldn't have come as any great surprise. The January 2024 transfer window, likewise, was a lot less eventful than January 2023, but there is still time for things to change. This is likely to be a less exciting window than usual, for all of the reasons we have covered, but it may well be a very entertaining last few days, again, especially for those outside of the elite. A lot of clubs have kept their powder dry, but there are deals to be done, and lots of teams just waiting for one deal to go through, somewhere, and that chain reaction or domino effect to then kick in. I imagine that we'll see that at some stage, or at least, I am hoping that we will because, as I say, Hull City don't have any players. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. I hope that was the case, obviously. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and it goes without saying at this stage, doesn't it? Make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads via the username @HITC Sevens, should you wish to do so, and all of those links plus a whole lot more should be down in the video description below. Cheers.